Hello, everyone. So welcome to our last session, final session. So this session is about Horn of Africa. And we are going to discuss how to focus attention on this travel region. The Horn of Africa is located in the eastern part of the African continent. So first of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Hirotō Keiichi Hirotō, professor of立命館 University. Today, I'm very glad to welcome the four panelists for this final sessions. So first of all, please allow me to explain about the background of the sessions. So the Horn of Africa is experiencing the most severe drought in recent history. So following 5 consecutive failed rainy seasons in part of Ethiopia, Kenya, and Somalia. People in those 3 countries have faced prolonged conflict and forced people displaced in search of food and water. So first of all, let's check the situation in Somalia. As everybody knows that, unfortunately, there has been no effective central government in Somalia in past 30 years. So as a result of that, the effect of protracted conflict and persistent violence are exacerbated by widespread drought, which has affected an estimated 7.8 million people. The number of displaced people has reached approximately 2.9 million, and many have lost their livelihood and access to the food and secured water. So on the contrary, in the country of Ethiopia, and as everybody knows that, more than 22 million people are estimated to be in need of humanitarian assistance in 2022 last year, according to the estimation by MSF. So many face the tragic consequences of conflict, such as a severe shortage of food and medicine, particularly communities in the region of Afar, Amhara, Tigray, and southern nations. So the fighting, especially in the northern part of Ethiopia, is still going on. That fight is affecting a strong impact on the humanitarian situation in especially the part of northern part of Ethiopia. And in Kenya itself doesn't have any political violence and conflict in that country. However, the Kenya was affected by the conflict in Somalia. So especially in Dagahare refugee camp, Kenya, rates of severe acute malnutrition rose sharply in 2022 as cholera raged and drought persisted. So aid agencies had urged donor countries to immediately scale up and send their pledge to enable and rapid response. So in Kenya, in addition, so Kenya's Dadaab, very famous refugee camp, refugee complex has been receiving hundreds and thousands of people from Somalia every week since 2022. So this session will focus on ongoing food nutrition crisis and conflict, and the issue around humanitarian access among the factors driving the humanitarian crisis in the regions. So today we have 4 panelists from 3 countries. And all 4 panelists are the experts for the humanitarian support, especially in Horn of Africa. So first of all, let me introduce those 4 panelists shortly by a presentation order. The first panelist is Miss Monica Camacho. Good evening, Monica. Can you hear me? Yes? Yes, Monica Camacho, she is MSF humanitarian representative for East Africa. She has 23 years of experience with MSF. She had worked as operational manager for 6 years for East African program in charge of Ethiopia, Somalia, and Sudan and South Sudan. As if everybody knows that there was a severe fighting is going on in Sudan today. So she's very busy, but she can join this session from Nairobi in Kenya. The second panelist is Mr. Abdi Ismail Isse. Good evening, Isse. So he is the operation coordinator for the Horn of Africa of ICRC. He has been working for 15 years in various management capacity with ICRC Since 2022, he has worked as operation coordinator for the Horn of Africa at ICRC headquarters in Geneva. So he is expert for the total situation of Somalia, Kenya, and Ethiopia. He is monitoring the situation of those countries from Geneva. Thank you very much for joining. And the third panelist is Miss Mai Matsukuma from from Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. She is a program coordinator of Good Neighbors Japan in Ethiopia since April 2022, almost 1 year ago. She has worked for the current position. Previously, she worked for a peace negotiation project of Carter Center in the United States. In 2022, she worked at UNDP Tunisia. Thank you very much for joining from Addis Ababa. And the last panelist is Mr. Vェナント Ndigila from Kenya. Thank you very much for joining. The Vェナントis emergency preparedness and response manager of Kenya Red Cross Society. So he joined the Kenya Red Cross since in 2011, so 12 years ago. He has led the national society capacity in successfully responding to major disasters, both natural and man-made, and has contributed in developing various national policies and plan or crisis management, such as Kenya Red Cross Security Handbook and Kenya Disaster Risk Management Bill. Thank you very much for joining. So today we have approximately 1.5 hours, 90 minutes. So the first of all, we are welcoming Monica from Nairobi. Can you hear me?
Yes, Professor, loud and clear.
Thank you very much. So, okay, please make a presentation. You approximately have less than 10 minutes. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Thanks for the introduction, Professor. You already covered some of the points I wanted to highlight. But basically, welcome and thanks, everybody. Thanks for this opportunity. I would like to take you through a quick journey through the region. Professor already highlighted some of the main points, but I want to take you deeper. The title of the session is the Horn of Africa, but I want to increase a bit more, and I'm very provocative, and I'm putting as well the Greater Horn of Africa, as the region it's as well going through a lot of turbulence, and I want to include here Sudan and South Sudan from a nutritional perspective, and as you are. The main objective was to tackle the food insecurity and nutrition. I think it's important to zoom out and to maintain these two countries in the radar for everybody. You will mention that the Sudan as well is going through since last Saturday through an internal conflict between the two main military parties, and I think that is putting even the country in a worse situation than the one that was before. So something that I wanted to highlight. Next slide, please. So these are two maps. On your left side, you have the ACLED last February map. Here is mapping and highlighting the main spots of conflict in the region. So I thought it was important to mention and to highlight that besides all the climate and drought situation, this region is under important political and economical turbulence. The dark dots are political instability. The orange ones are civil unrest. So you can see that we have Ethiopia, Somalia, Kenya itself, despite the fact that it's a peaceful country, but there are some civil tensions going on at the moment. On the right part of your screens, you have the FuseNet map. It's the food insecurity mapping. You can see in orange the IPC, what is called the IPC4 situation, means the number of severe malnourished people are quite high. And in red, IPC 5, meaning people that are already under heavy alert and potentially close to on the brink of famine. So you see the whole region, and as I mentioned purposely, Sudan and South Sudan are included, so you can see how not only the Horn of Africa, but these countries as well, due to different reasons, are as well severely affected. Next slide, please. This still, I want to stress conflict, and you see the evolution between 2 months is the same source, ACLED, and on the left you have the February mapping, and on your right you have the March mapping. You can see the increase of orange dots. As I mentioned, it's the demonstrations and civil unrest that shows there are some reasons, but not only political situation, but the economical situation. High rates of inflation in the region are making the communities and the population to be under very, very severe pressure. Food prices and commodities prices are quite high at the moment, putting more populations and possibilities of civil unrest to a very high part. On Somalia, we have an ongoing military operation, which potentially might continue increasing displacement of population. And as mentioned, since last Saturday, Sudan as well is under a very critical situation. Next slide, please. How those consequences, going back to the drought, are affecting the people in a tangible manner? There are different numbers, but around 23 to 24 million people in the region are already facing high levels of food insecurity. This means people that are under IPC phase 3. That means the orange, red, and darker red colors in the graphics before. Ethiopia is a very particular case, as the government is not having an official system recording the IPC data, but the figures already are around 24 million people living in drought-affected areas, of which 13 million are people that are potentially targeted for food distributions and nutritional programs. For Kenya, we are talking about the northern part, the districts of Turkana, Mandera, Marsabit, Wajir, and Garissa, and it's estimated around 3.3 million people that are high food insecure. And for Somalia, there were high alerts of famine in the previous months. Fortunately, due to some rains, increase of rains, and scale up of humanitarian assistance, this scenario is somehow mitigated. But still, there are some areas that are severely affected. So Somalia is not out of the famine alert or the famine possibility, but somehow it's showing some the areas exposed to deterioration are less than expected initially. So this is a picture for the whole region. Next, please. What MSF is doing in these locations. So we have programs in the 3 countries. We have regular interventions that are taking place on regular basis. As you know, we have a strong capacity to do emergency response. So we have the regular projects that support regular activities and emergency interventions. For the case of nutrition, we have interventions going on at the moment in Kenya, in the areas of Marsabit, Mandera, and the Dadaab and the Gahale refugee camps. For Somalia, we have interventions in a non-permanent basis in Jubaland and with teams permanently seated in Baidoa area. As well, during the last clashes of early this year in Lassanot in Somaliland, we had an emergency response, which is not nutritional related, but as people were displaced, they were in need of food assistance. But it's not drought. The cause of the nutrition is not drought related. And for Ethiopia, we have ongoing projects in Afar region, Somali region to a smaller scale, and we are closely monitoring Oromia region. Oromia as well is affected by civil unrest and conflict, so access is a major concern in this area. And at the moment, we have interventions and assessments going in Borana area. Next slide, please. And here I want to start to focus on the challenges, which are one of the objectives of this session, to try to see how we can altogether better response. Like Professor mentioned, it's an unprecedented situation. I think this is an important point. 5 consecutive below average rain seasons means each country in average, what this number means is every year they have 2 rainy seasons. That's the pattern, and that is the usual climatological situation. 5 consecutive rainy seasons mean 2.5 years that these communities are not having a sustainable amount of rain. It doesn't mean it doesn't rain. It means it rains really below the average. These communities were already in a very fragile situation, with having multi-shocks, communities that were still recovering from COVID, very exposed to conflict, as mentioned, for the 3, for Somalia, Ethiopia, and Kenya. Climate, we are talking about the drought. Cost of living, inflation due to different circumstances, not only the war in Ukraine and the lack of availability of grains and pesticides, but already poor harvest situation in the region is affecting these communities. These multi-shocks are on top of health systems that are already struggling. Situations, countries that are having systems that are not able to cope with all these multi-shocked situations. With all these multiple crises, all organizations, including MSF, we are all in a very difficult situation, having to do tough exercises of reprioritization based on needs, based on target groups, potentially sacrificing prevention packages as everybody's trying to focus and target the emergency responses, and in our case, trying to give priority to the saving lives situation, so pure emergency components. And what it has translated is that some long-term or some preventive packages or components that could mitigate the further deterioration of these communities are being compromised, reduced, or even stopped. The funding reduction is for donors is a major concern. It's a region that is competing with other locations, and just to give you a figure, for the 3 countries, for Kenya, Somalia, and Ethiopia, in the next 4 months, it is estimated the humanitarian appeal is 2.6 billion, which so far hasn't been raised. So it's not the small numbers, as the numbers as well of population targeted are quite high. As well, another element important to flag is that these communities are in hard to reach areas. Most of them are pastoralist, very scattered, which difficults puts the different interventions in a difficult situation, increasing cost and making it hard to reach these people, and areas that are prone to conflict, for sure exacerbated by drought. Populations are forced to move in search of water. Livelihood has been lost to a very large extent, so people are forced to move, trying to look for either greener areas or just seeking assistance. So this has put more pressure in the region. Next slide, please. Just to show a graphic on how this translates in terms of population movements, just for this small area of the three countries, there are already 2.5 million people that are internally displaced. These are data from UNHCR and from IOM. As you can see on the right, Somalia already has almost reaching 2 million of people that has been displaced. And on the left, you have the number of people of refugees. I want to give here a remark. In the case of Kenya, registration process is closed. So many of these numbers are only official numbers, but we know that there are people that have arrived to the refugee camps in the case of Dadaab that haven't been registered. So potentially this number is far higher than that is officially registered. Kenya just opened the registration of Dadaab for new refugees 1 month ago. And there was already a bulk of around 100,000 people that haven't been registered in the last months and years. So these numbers potentially are higher than the official registered people. Most of these people are claiming to be moving both due to drought and conflict. That's a clear reason of why they are moving. And we are seeing concerning levels of malnutrition in new refugees arriving. In Dadaab, what we have seen is people were somehow arriving not in a very bad situation, but months after they have arrived, as a scale up of the system and possibility to provide services didn't go fast enough, they have deteriorated in a very rapid manner. Deterioration as well of their nutritional situation. Next slide, please. And the last points I want to highlight, besides nutrition, these populations are facing as well other health situations. It was mentioned as well, measles, cholera, many other vaccine preventable diseases. And the system, bear in mind that due to COVID was severely affected, and many of these children or many of this population haven't been able to have the regular vaccination programs, so the communities are really behind a schedule. And as I mentioned, the health systems are very stretched. Availability of medical data is an issue, as many of these locations are hard to reach. There is lack of clarity, at least from an MSF perspective, on clear understanding what is the situation. In Somalia, remember, many of the areas that are affected by the drought are under control of Al-Shabaab, which puts a very difficult situation to understand or to reach or to assess what is the real situation of these people. Protection is another major component here. Sexual violence is highlighted as communities have to move. Many of the men are moving with the animals or having to look for other alternatives, leaving the women and the girls behind. Ladies that are having to move further in the search of water or wood or any subsistence mean. So there are clear levels of sexual violence affecting these mainly women and children. And as I mentioned, important to flag that the situation, nutritional situation, is not only affecting Horn of Africa, but South Sudan has been having another climate situation, which are the floods. It's not drought, it's floods. It's 4 consecutive years as well, affecting the water levels haven't gone down, and communities haven't been able to plant, and animals as well had to look for different areas. So South Sudan has a constant and stable situation, but as well climate situations are not supported. And Sudan comes from a very unstable political situation, aggravated by an economical situation, and the most recent eruption of conflict. From MSF, we are glad to have these kind of opportunities to flag the situation in the Horn, and in the region in general, because it's crises that are competing with other as well important crises. So glad to have the opportunity to be here and share with you our views. Thank you, Professor. Back to you.
Thank you, Monica. Thank you very much. So she reported how the crisis in Horn of Africa is so serious, and she updated some numbers and estimations of the people who are affected by this crisis. So we may listen to the same kind of voice from next presenter. So the next presenter is Mr. Abdi Ismail Isse from Geneva. Hi, yes. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Good afternoon.
Good evening from Japan. Okay. Good afternoon, Geneva. Okay. So could you make a presentation?
Yes, well, good afternoon and good evening, of course, to you, Professor Keishi, to my co-panelists, of course, and to the audience listening today. I'm the operations coordinator for the International Committee of the Red Cross, the ICRC, covering the Horn of Africa. And what I'm going to say, I think there's going to be a little bit of an overlap, Professor Keishi, as you suggested, with what Monica has already mentioned about the Horn of Africa. And interestingly enough, also from our point of view, from the ICRC point of view, the Horn of Africa goes a little bit more beyond than the three countries that we mentioned earlier in the day. And in fact, the fact that I am the coordinator of not only Ethiopia and Eritrea, but also Sudan and South Sudan is in fact a testament to that. So thank you again for of course having me and for taking the time to listen to the update on what I'm going to say in the Horn of Africa. We have seen, as I said earlier from the presentation from Monica, specific data about nutrition, about food insecurity in the region. So I will not really go too much into detail about that. But while the effects of course, in the region of climate change and macroeconomic trends like rising food prices cannot be neglected, what is really clear for us is that armed conflicts and violence born out of armed conflict remains really one of the key drivers of food insecurity in the region and in the greater Horn of Africa region, as was rightly pointed out. For example, what we are seeing today in a country like Somalia, without going really too much into detail, is that children are really disproportionately affected by the ongoing food crisis. And for example, since the beginning of this past year, in fact, 2022, in the 16 clinics that the International Committee of the Red Cross is supporting, the levels of severe malnutrition has increased dramatically and affecting in a very disproportionate manner specifically children who are finding themselves on the brunt of this. The levels of water, of course, available in the country have lowered and have really become deteriorated in many places. And many people, because of that, because of Somalia being a society that is a pastoralist, most of the time people live on their livestock and with their livestock. And the fact that they are not able to really provide food and manure for their livestock is really an important element of loss of asset and dignity for the communities. And what happens often is that people actually start selling their animals, and of course they're not able to sell it with a reasonable price, precisely because the malnutrition is affecting not only the individuals and humans, and of course the most vulnerable like children, women, and the elderly, but also animals and livestock, which of course are a great asset for the communities. So because of all of these compounding elements, each month thousands and thousands of community members and peoples from the rural areas really try to leave and abandon their homes in search, of course, of water, but also of food and livelihood. And many of these people actually end up becoming IDPs, either in IDP camps that have been set up wherever possible by international organizations and NGOs and UN, or in many other situations, really come into the urban centers and really become part of what used to be called back in the days the proletariat. But of course, in the absence of jobs, people don't obviously have any opportunities for work and employment, and basically live off of the street in many urban centers. So Because, of course, Somalia is also affected and has been affected, is a protracted conflict over the last 30 years. Basically, we're seeing also bouts of violence and reemergence of conflict in the country. As was mentioned earlier by Monica, of course, today the conflict in Somalia is mostly focusing, of course, in the south, where there is an international armed conflict, but also on the northern part of the country. As we have seen the last few months, there has been quite high numbers of clashes and violence in urban centers, in inhabited areas, which have engendered a lot of people and have caused a lot of people to really seek refuge and displace and leave homes in the region. So, together with the Somali Red Crescent Society, we have been responding to many of the humanitarian needs caused by violence, but we have been also calling to the parties in the conflict and those who are involved in the fighting for restraint, for applying international humanitarian law as an important tool to safeguard the civilians from harm and from violence, and civilian infrastructure from harm and from violence, and calling really basically for respect for the rules of war and international humanitarian law. So the conflict basically has, of course, devastated the lives of many people, but the reality is that today people really have taken droughts, and we've heard how rains have failed on successive cycles. It has become really normal for many people in the Horn of Africa, not only in key areas like Somalia or northern Kenya or eastern Ethiopia. And I think it's important that humanitarian organizations and organizations like ours really move beyond this piecemeal support that we give, and that we really try to look at things from a systemic point of view in order to help people really build their resilience and allow them really and give them means and work with them to find the means for to adapt to the changing nature that is literally changing and becoming less hospitable to life. And of course, that has a consequence for the people who are particularly vulnerable, like the pastoralists and like nomads and communities living on search for food and for water for their livestock, but also for communities who have no longer the capacity to farm because exactly of water representing almost 85% of the needs for people in terms of production of food, and therefore not having the capacity really to sustain their own lives. So these are really incredible challenges that people face and have been facing over the last few years, and unfortunately will continue to face also, I must admit, in the foreseeable future. When it comes to Ethiopia, I think last year, towards the end of 2022, in fact, November in 2022, we also saw a glimmer of hope with the news, of course, of a cessation of hostilities agreement signed for the conflict in northern Ethiopia, involving, of course, the regions of Tigray, Amhara, and Afar. And this conflict, of course, lasted for 2 years and has had devastating consequences on the lives of many communities and people. And in fact, millions have been displaced within the Ethiopian frontiers, but still displaced away from areas of conflict. It goes without saying that as ICRC and as humanitarians, of course, we have high hopes that the peace will be sustained and people will be able to rebuild their lives. But also, I think we have to be really honest and clear about the fact that there are a lot of challenges, and many of these challenges are still not surmounted by the people. Many of these people who have been displaced are not able to go back to their communities. And those who are able to go back to their communities, of course, they find their homes, their schools, their health clinics and hospitals completely destroyed, and of course their livelihoods gone in the process. So this is really harrowing. And in the past few months, but also at the height of the conflict of the past 2 years, the ICRC, together with Ethiopian Red Cross Society, has been working extremely hard in bringing aid to communities living not only in in Tigray region and in Mekele particularly, but also in areas in northern Amhara and in Afar region that had not been reached by any other humanitarian actor. And this has provided a degree of relief to people who have been able to receive water, food, and access to healthcare for almost a period of 6 months when no other humanitarian actor was able to fly and to go into the area in Tigray. The ICRC was the only organization who was able to fly airplanes full of medications and supplies to bring to the hospitals in the northern part of the country. So this is something that I think we are quite proud of, but still it's just a token, a drop on the ocean of the needs that exist in the country. And the conflict in northern Ethiopia also, of course, took a heavy toll on the healthcare system. Just an example, the Ethiopian Red Cross Society in the country has been operating more than 250 ambulances in Tigray when the war started in November 2020, a little bit over 2 years ago. And today, that number from 250 ambulances that were able to go around to support communities, to provide assistance and to take vulnerable and weak people from their homes to hospitals, that number from 250 has gone down to 82. And this is just an example. Last year, when I was in Ethiopia, when I went to the areas in Amhara, all the way up to Tigray region, I have seen for myself the impact of the conflict and the impact of the conflict, especially on the health infrastructure, with hospitals looted, with physical rehabilitation centers, and clinics that had not received and not been able to provide assistance to the people, to mothers who were pregnant, precisely because people had not received them. Did not have the equipment or the medication, and health personnel were not able to feed themselves because they had not received the salaries and support that they needed. So all of this has created really an important element of danger for communities and for the lives of the people, but also has once again, one more time, brought forward the need to safeguard access to health as an important need and an important right for communities. And we have been calling on several occasions to parties to the conflict to really safeguard not only health infrastructure, but also personnel, the equipment, and of course the patients and those who are providing access to care and to medical needs. Luckily, over the past few months, the conflict in Ethiopia has subsided. There has been a truce that has been reached, a peace agreement that has allowed for more of the assistance to go into the areas, not only in the north, but also, as I said, in Afar and Amhara regions which are adjacent regions to the epicenter of the conflict. However, even during this period of peace, the lasting consequences of the conflict really remain. Again, I'm going to pick on something that had been said earlier, and in safe houses and in one-stop centers that the ICRC is supporting and working with the local community and with the local health providers, we really see that survivors of sexual violence, the impact that this war has had, and the invisible and oftentimes also visible scars that many of the people in Ethiopia, and especially the women and children, are experiencing, together with have experienced, together with horrific testimonies, of course, and the scars, as I said, both physical and mental, that they're carrying and will always carry with them due to this. So, of course, the access to health and services and treatment for many of these populations and people has improved, but of course the needs remain very high. And as the conflict subsides, as people feel comfortable to get out and to come to the urban centers and to seek medical attentions, the ICRC is starting to see the incredible number of people who have been affected by sexual violence, for example, rise at a high level.
Sorry for interrupting. So each of you have less than 10 minutes. So can you just hand over to the presenter?
I will absolutely conclude by saying that months, Professor Keishi, months after the fighting has ended, areas in Tigray and Amhara and Afar are still littered with unexplosive remnants of war. And this, again, represents another layer of danger for communities, for children, for farmers, as they start going back to their communities and start rebuilding their lives. So with that, I will end. Thank you very much, Professor Keishi, and the floor is back to you again.
Thank you very much for the comprehensive instructions about the situation in Horn of Africa, especially in Ethiopia. So let's hand over to the next presenter from Addis Ababa, Mai-san, Matsumura-san. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Dr. Shirato, thank you very much for the introduction.
I heard that.
My name is...
Okay, yeah, just go ahead. Yeah, I heard that internet access from Addis Ababa is not so stable, so that, can you hear me clearly?
Yes, yes, but today it seems great.
Okay,
thank you very much.
Let's go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you very much. So my name is Mai Matsukuma. I'm from the NGO called Good Neighbors. And I am a program coordinator, and I'm connecting today from Ethiopia, a country in Horn of Africa. So let me show you my presentation. So as from the previous, Monica and also Abdi mentioned about what's going on in Horn of Africa, including some situations mentioned by Abdi. And I also want to show you what's going on in Ethiopia. So to the panelists, I have a question. Do you guys know how many people in Ethiopia are in need of humanitarian assistance nowadays? For example, I will give you a hint. For example, in Ukraine, currently 17.6 million people are in need. In fact, in Ethiopia, it's 28.6 million people are in need of humanitarian assistance. We can say Ethiopia faces one of the largest humanitarian crises in the world in terms of the number of the people in need. So one of the reasons is, even Abdi mentioned, the conflict. So as Abdi mentioned, the Tigray, the most known conflict is in the north, the Tigray, as you can see in the orange dot in this map. This map is from Aklet. The data is the end of last year. So these are the compiled violence throughout the last year, 2022. This Tigray, the conflict between Tigray and the government forces has actually reached a peace agreement in November last year. So because of this, some people misunderstand that, okay, Ethiopia finally, they became peaceful. It's actually not. So as you can see you can see the blue dots from the west to the east, these Oromia regions, and also other regions in the south also. There are many other conflicts still ongoing in the country. And another reason is the drought. And I think the drought impact has already mentioned by Monica. So I will not go into the detail, but as you can see, almost the large part of the Ethiopia is highly affected by the drought. So I will show you the numbers. So more than 1 in 5 people in Ethiopia are in need of immediate assistance. The numbers I showed you, 28.6 million people for the Japanese panelists, to make you understand easily, this is equivalent to 509 Tokyo domes. And also this is almost 23% of the entire population in Ethiopia. And luckily, Japan and Ethiopia has almost a similar population numbers. So you can see how big this number is. And due to the conflict and the drought, 4.6 million people are internally displaced. And actually 24 million people are living in the drought affected areas. And among them, more than 13 million people are in need of humanitarian assistance. And as Abdi also mentioned, the most of them are pastoralists. But unfortunately, 6.85 million livestock animals they have been died since last 2021. And not only for these conflicts, but also the conflicts in neighboring countries and also other disasters. More than 880,000 refugees in Ethiopia. I also want to show you the photos. So this photo I took in one of the IDP camps in Amhara regions. Surprisingly, all these IDPs are not from Tigray. They're from Oromia regions. So you can see also the conflicts in other parts of the Ethiopia has also significant impact on the people. And only in this building, you can see more than 4,000 people are living in this compound. This is the child-friendly space of inside the IDP camp. Obviously, it's not child-friendly anymore, it's overcrowded. And this is I took the photo from UNHCR, but as you can see, there are many pastoralists who lost the animals. Their lives depend on the animals. So I just want to briefly show you what we are doing as a Good Neighbors Japan. We have four focus areas: food and livelihood, and also the reconstruction, rehabilitation of the health and educational services, and also promotion of social cohesion, the peace building. This is our food assistance photos. We're distributing the food in the IDP camp that I previously showed you. And this is what we are providing the laboratory materials to the conflict affected schools. Those schools has been used for the camp, for the military, and also sometimes for the displaced people. We also trying to bring the peace through the joint livelihood activities between refugees and also host communities. This is also what we are doing is to bring different communities together to prevent the future conflict. So we are doing this kind of activities. We are actually now implementing several development and humanitarian activities with the fund of Japan platform or either in Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan. But there is so many challenges when implementing these activities. One of the challenges is food inflation. You can see this graph is from last year. So in the orange line is 2021 price of the wheat grain. And the green line is the price of last year. So as you can see, the price of the food increased a lot. And one of the reasons of this is actually the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. And since Ethiopia imported many grains and also other food items, so we faced a challenge because one of our projects is food distribution. We are procuring food inside the country. So, and another challenge is accessibility. As Monica also mentioned, that the areas where the needs is high is also most of the time it's the areas which is dangerous and it's in the conflict. So in these areas in orange, it's difficult to go deep inside. So these are the main challenges, but the biggest challenge for us is actually the lack of financial resources. So there are lack of media coverage, and because of that, or vice versa, there are low attention of the people. So because of this, we face the challenge of immobilizing enough funding for our activities. For example, for the Japan platform, this year's budget is Ukraine for 700 million yen, it's 7 oku yen. But for Ethiopia, it's only 40 million yen, only 4,000,000 yen for Japanese people, sorry. So, but as you can see, this is our biggest challenge. So thank you very much for your attention. And this issue is very serious. So I'm really happy today to discuss these issues with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, the point you have raised right now, how to get the attention from the international society is one of the critically important issues in order to discuss. So in terms of discussion, so let's discuss about that issues later. Okay, thank you very much for your not only just the presentation, but for raising a question and just emphasizing the talking point for the discussions. Okay, before we go to the final presenter, Mr. Vennant, unfortunately, the Monica must leave the sessions in order to join the discussion about the situation in Sudan. So, yeah, anyways, thank you very much for joining the Monicas. Okay, thank you. Okay.
Apologies, Professor. All the best.
All the best. Thank you very much. Okay, sorry for the interruptions. Okay, next, Mr. Vennant. I'm sorry, my pronunciation is not good. Your surname, Ngila, is that okay?
Yeah, Ndigila is the right way, but so far so good, Professor.
Thank you. You're from Nairobi. Okay, could you go ahead, please?
Correct. Thank you very much. Hope you can hear me clearly. I hope you can hear me, Professor.
Yes, I can hear clearly.
Yeah, thank you. So good afternoon and good evening, colleagues. My name is Vennant Ndigila, the Emergency Preparedness and Response Manager, Kenya Red Cross Society. I'm presenting from Nairobi, and I want to say it's an honor to participate in this forum here today. I'll share my screen because I am going to present a few slides just to give the experience, the Kenyan experience on the drought and other related challenges which we are facing. I try to relate it as much as possible again to conflict, though we don't have very significant conflict in the country, but in the neighboring country and also the other low-level conflicts. So this is the situation around the food crisis in the country. As you can see, the deep red is indicating the counties in emergency phase. Kenya has 47 counties, and currently 23 counties are very much affected by the drought. These are the counties in the arid and semi-arid parts of the country, and they have both a little bit of agro pastoralists and most of them pastoralist livelihood activities. The drought situation came up after 5 failed seasons, and I'd like very briefly to show us how it came about. From October, November, December rains in the year 2020, as we heard from Monica, the regions, the Horn of Africa region has 2 main rain seasons. One is the March, April, May. The second one is the October, November, December. From this graph, where we can see that the rains experienced in this year are very much lower than the long-term average rains. From the graphs there, the long-term mean or average is in red, and the total rains experience is in blue. So we can see significantly the rains are very much lower. And the maps on the right is indicating how the rains were distributed. Especially, we can see the yellow colors is indicating that quite significant area received less than 50% of the rains. I want to again show progressively how the rains moved over the years until we found the situation as at now. So in the March, April, May season of 2021, the same experience. Now this one again worse, because we can see the range, the comparison between the average and the experience range is much higher. Therefore, the map can also show that from the yellows and the browns indicating the areas which received very much below average range. So the situation continued again on the October, November, December rains it proceeded until now. The more counties are becoming receive less and less rains. Therefore, as it is shown in the map, we can see only the central part received significant rains. When we reached the early months of 2022, the situation worsened, and as you can see, the map there is indicating more areas with very less rains and smaller number of counties with any significant rains. By the time it was reaching the end of 2022, the situation was very, very drastic, and that's why we are finding in the early months of 2023, we have some counties on emergency phase and the others in the very deteriorated phase. This, again, the progression indicates how vulnerable as a country Kenya is in terms of responding or dealing with drought as it develops. It shows how there is lack of any early actions to be able to manage this situation to avoid it becoming a food crisis. And this again can give us a message of how again the vulnerable the country is, again having in mind the other challenges, the other conflicts, and the other global economic situations. So this slide very briefly shows us again how the effects came about over the years, and the population started increasing from 2021. It was 2.1 million people who were in need of food assistance continuously. Then by the end of 2022, it came up to 4.4 million. And as at now, we have around 4.5 million people who are in need of food assistance on a continuous basis. Around 1 million children under 5 are also in need of nutritional support. The numbers rising from 2021 up to now, where it is about 1 million. Same to, again, the pregnant and lactating mothers, and of course, the aged also, it is in the same situation. Again, the message coming up as in how, again, this kind of crisis seeming very neglected, because it can take so many years to develop gradually, and instead of it being managed at some stage, it is widening both in terms of geography and in terms of numbers. These are some of the simple pictures showing the dried water sources, the crop failure, and how far the population have to go to get water in some of the dried water sources. By the end of the day, then we have the numbers as indicated there. 2.5 million livestock deaths have been reported as at now. As we saw, most of the counties are livestock farmers. Therefore, 2.5 million deaths is quite a big dent for the livelihoods of those population, and therefore in terms of food security, because there is low production in terms of milk and also in terms of meat, which is the staple food for most of the people in northern and northeastern Kenya. I want us to note also there was an increase in conflicts. As we said, Kenya has been relatively peaceful. However, the conflict in Somalia, of course, led to increase in influx of refugees into the Dadaab and also the Dadaab camp. But also internally, there are some low-level conflicts which come up after the population or the communities compete against the dwindling resources, mostly around pasture and water sources. And the numbers increased until some deaths were reported, and at least some 10,000 families were displaced in some counties. When the drought conditions were becoming more significant, some national efforts were put across. And I want us to remember, when we are seeing the impact of the interventions, how then they can relate to these initial efforts, most of them at the national policy level, where there was a declaration of the drought as a national disaster by the president, sometimes in September. The Kenya Red Cross, through, of course, the movement, we did a drought emergency appeal, sometimes in August 2022. And then the government also gazetted a National Drought Response Steering Committee under the auspices of the Kenya Red Cross, sometimes in November 2022. And then there was a lot of involvement of the public-private sector participation, or rather collaboration, in terms of this drought response. These efforts, you can see most of them came up in 2022, when the situation had really deteriorated. And again, that was the appeal there, around 19 million CHF, and realization is still a bit low, almost less than 30%, 1.5 years later. And we still have on the right there some of the very urgent and priority needs in terms of the numbers. The intervention so far, it's at least from the Kenya Red Cross perspective or experience, 1.4 million people have been supported with food and some 350 schools, and again, some 271,000 people have been supported by cash, then water, sanitation in some 10 counties, and also some health outreaches. And then there was some intervention around animal offtake, where we are doing the program. We buy the animals and slaughter and sell. We give the meat, to those who are in need. This is part of the food security intervention. So these are some of the pictures of some of the intervention. So finally, some of the experiences there is, of course, limited resources, as you have heard earlier, but also the interethnic conflicts led to a lot of in-country migration, or rather movement, where now we have to go more distances to reach the beneficiary or the affected people. And of course, the country is largely still remote, with very little, or rather with not a lot of paved roads, so making it very hard to reach the population as they move further in search of water and pasture for grazing. Of course, the ever-changing coordination needs, and this again is coupled by the dwindling resources, some of the decisions made at the national level. Remember, Kenya was under the elections, or rather holding the general elections in 2022. So also again, bring a lot of changes around decisions of coordination. So we had to deal with that. Some increased security risks in some of the areas where we were experiencing community conflicts, therefore making it hard to continue with the aid activities. We had to change and rechange some of our operating procedures in order to be able to reach the population. Then finally, unsupported in-kind donations. This one is something we have experienced recently, or rather in this, we have never experienced this in any previous drought emergencies, where the bigger part of food contributed by donors was largely unsupported in terms of the logistics costs. So, and they do in-kind contribution, and which there's no way we can reject. We have to ensure it reaches the population. So therefore, it has remained quite a big cost, which is not supported. So, but I think also lessons we learned here to assist improving our work. The overdependency of global support vis-a-vis local partnership has been a very big impact, because we are experiencing the effects of the global economic slowdown, if you may call it so, because the international support slowed down also. Then one also is about the mental health and psychosocial support issues in the drought-affected population. They largely go unattended because they're very slow and very hard to detect. And as the people are moving up and down, so there's need, therefore, to find a way of identifying these needs early in good time and aligning them as part of some of the responses. And then, of course, having context-specific interventions to support life-saving activities and also recovery. Then, of course, the multiple fade seasons of the rain lead to compounded and increased effects. And I also want to add here that, again, by the fact that season after season subsequently, they fail and they lead to increased drought effects, then there is need, therefore, to find ways of ending the drought as an emergency by having more information around the climate change, and having to involve the community more in terms of using the climate information to inform early actions and reduce the drought effects. Yeah, that is the simple experience around the drought in Kenya, the current drought or other food crisis in Kenya, vis-a-vis the other existing conditions. Thank you, and over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation. Actually, we have more than 100 people as an audience today, and we are waiting for the question and comments to the panelists. So, but unfortunately, we didn't have any comment and questions. So, sorry. I have one. But before we start to, okay, yeah. If someone who wants to ask a question to the panelist, or if someone who has a comment to the panelist, please write in the chat space. But before that, so let me ask one question from one panelist to the other panelist. So as Mai already raised as a talking point that talking point is strongly related to today's talking point is how to focus attention on these tribal regions. So as Mai already showed in her PowerPoint, that the total number of the people who need assistance in Ethiopia is more than the number of the people who need assistance in Ukraine, war in Ukraine. So, but unfortunately, there is no day that we don't see the news on Ukraine in past 1 year. We are watching the news on the war on Ukraine every day in Japan, but we never see the news that the serious humanitarian crisis is going on in the Horn of Africa. Actually, before I started to teach in the university as a professor, I used to be the newspaper reporter based in Johannesburg, South Africa, as a correspondent. So I can imagine how, I can imagine, and I have a strong sympathy with Mai, that it's quite difficult for the humanitarian support organizations, including MSF and Red Cross and so on, are suffering from how to get the attention from the international society into the issue in Africa. So if there are some journalists or media workers in the audience, I just want to ask the reason why you are neglecting the news in Africa. this is a question from me to the audience. If there are someone who is working as a media worker or the journalist in the audience, please give us some answer or the comment. And I just would like to ask Abdi, can you hear me? Yes. Let me introduce one interesting examples in Japan. The last year, there was a TICAD 8 in Tunisia that was hosted by government of Japan. In the TICAD, the Prime Minister Kishida made a speech that Japan will commit the $3 billion US for the African development. If Japanese Prime Minister said so 20 years ago or 10 years ago, so no one reacted. It doesn't matter. If government of Japan would like to give a huge amount of aid to the African continent, that will be okay. But the last year, we could see a strange phenomenon. There are many criticized in the SNS society that those money should not be used in Africa. Those money should be used in Japan for the domestic problem. So we can see that the public opinion in Japan tends to prefer that the money should be used for the domestic matters, not for the humanitarian purposes in the African continent. This is one of the new phenomena, as Vennant said, that the economic recession and economic reduction is strongly affected to the situation in the humanitarian support. So you are handling and covering the issue from Europe. So I'm very much interested in the situation of public opinion in Europe. And I think situation seems to be similar to Japan or a little bit different from Japan. Could you give us some good instructions or hint for discussing about these issues, how to get attention from the public audience on the issue on Africa?
Yes, Professor Keishi. I think this is a very, very important question and certainly a very difficult one to address. Absolutely. I think the reality is that absolutely the economic downturn, the inflation, the challenges that many societies and many people face are having, of course, also on a negative effect, of course, on governments' capabilities and availability of resource to fund humanitarian operations abroad. And this is unfortunately a reality that we are aware of and we see constantly, particularly as you kindly mentioned earlier about protracted crises like, for example, the one of Somalia that we've mentioned that has been going on for 30 years. We've been talking about Democratic Republic of Congo and many other countries, Afghanistan, Yemen, and just to name a few of them. So these are challenges that unfortunately governments need to address, and these are challenges that go beyond the remit of a small humanitarian organization or any humanitarian organization that can address. These are really large problems that extend beyond national borders. They are really affecting vulnerable communities. People are fleeing this violence and many of these climate shocks across borders, and in fact, sometimes even across continents, as the global migration flux shows. So this is why it's really, really crucial, Professor Keishi, that governments and of course partners like the Red Cross and the Red Crescent partners, but also donors per se in a general way, really continue their support to organizations like the ones that are part of this panel today, so that we are able really to address these problems together with this, because they really are the key actors. Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. So, Mai-san, Matsukuma-san, so would you like to add any comment about these issues?
I don't know how many of the participants today joined the first session of the hybrid session of this Humanitarian Congress. The first session's topic is actually what are the differences between the conflicts which get the much attention and also which don't get the enough attention. And one of the panelists is actually a student, university student. And she also mentioned that for like Japanese people, I mean, just as an example for Japan case, but for Japanese people tend to get more attention, tend to get like kind of like compassion feeling to the situations based on how much they can feel the situations as a real. Like, what about if there are any connections that Japanese people can find between the incidents, between the situations happening in other countries, and also the situations themselves in Japan. So maybe we also, as a humanitarian actors and also development organizations, we should also think more strategically about this, how can I say, like a PR issues. How can we get more attentions to the issues that we are dealing with more strategically? Like, for example, in Ethiopia, maybe I was just thinking, like, because Japanese people love coffees, they are loving coffees. So they have much like feeling for the coffees. And then if there's something that affects the prices of coffee that they are taking due to the conflict, due to the drought, maybe there will be more attention. Like, I was just thinking, like, this is just an example, but maybe we should come together, different organizations, different UN agencies. We should come together and think about the strategy of how can we get the more attention from the public.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much. So we have two questions from audience. So let me read. The first question is from Yumi Kirino-san in JICA. According to Monica, unfortunately, Monica had already left for her discussions for the Sudanese issues. But anyway, according to Monica and Abdi, majority of the people in need are pastoralists, and in addition to themselves, their assets, livestock, animals, have been severely affected in this crisis. Yeah. When we consider of emergency assistances in livestock sector, what option do we have? This is a question. So I think Abdi, it's appropriate person for you for this question.
I can happily take this question, and thank you very much to Yumi Kirino for asking this question. And you really ask a relevant question. This is exactly one of the key sectors where the ICRC is working extremely deeply and broadly across the whole of Sahel, not only in the Horn of Africa, but really beyond in many other regions in Africa. And one of the key tangible outputs and work that the ICRC does is really, for example, vaccination of livestock. In many of these places, livestock is really a clear asset, and oftentimes in places like South Sudan is almost like the equivalent of cash. So a healthy livestock, a healthy camel, a healthy cow is really an asset for many communities who often have nothing else. So that is something that, for example, we invest quite a lot of energy and resources. There is a lot of training that goes alongside with that, for example, with community animal health workers, with provision of vaccinations, of trainings, and supporting and accompanying many of, for example, these community animal health workers access areas where, for example, non-state armed actors or other groups who are outside of the control of the state and the government are operating. So oftentimes we do accompany, we do provide protection, we do play an important role as a neutral intermediary, as ICRC, to really accompany not only personnel from the Ministry of Health to do the health activities for people, but also for animals. Just perhaps another example that I can give to me Kirino about this is that I was born in a very small city in the center of Somalia, and this city is affected by floods and drought, and oftentimes twice a year it gets flooded because there's a river that goes through it. So one of the things that humanitarian actors can perhaps start investing is not sandbags to cover the flooding every year, the same response to have sandbags cover the banks of the river to avoid the flooding. But there could be perhaps a little bit more investment in much more sustainable infrastructure that could allow to divert that water, to allow to have that water to be caught, to be used for farming in times of perhaps low rainfall. So these are really some innovative activities that take place. Livestock insurance is another one, another important and innovative type of project that the ICRC is also doing in the eastern part of Ethiopia. So there are activities, and I think donors and governments and partners are more than welcome really to inquire about this innovative work, and if they are willing to support and to really engage in these projects, we are more than willing to provide the expertise and continue the discussion further. Back to you, Professor Keishi.
Thank you. Unfortunately,
Professor,
yeah.
Professor, can I add something
Yes,
about responding for livestock,
livestock, yes,
as an emergency response?
In Kenya, or yeah, as well. Okay.
Yes, thank you. From our recent experience, there's a program where we do the livestock offtake, where if you see the drought conditions are already deteriorating, and also the weather predictions are predicting failed seasons, then it seems as if the existing livestock which have already been affected, they need to find a way of how we can save them. So where we go and purchase them, we look at those which are very affected, we purchase them and we slaughter them, and then we distribute meat to those who are in need, mostly the farmers and the population around there. So this does achieves two things. One, it tries to safeguard the valuable assets, and then at the same time it provides food and contributes to food security for those who are affected. Yeah, that's what I wanted to add.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we have to close this session in next 10 minutes, and we have one more question from audience. Let me read. The question from Maki Igarashi, IFRCPMZ. The question is, thank you very much for all presentations. I can see the similar situation, extremely drought, food insecurity in past 20 years due to donor fatigue and shifting media interest to Ukraine, etc. What and how we can do differently in coming years and decades to make a difference? Thank you. So I think all panelists, three panelists, if you have some idea about this, how should I say, comments or questions or suggestions, I think this will be the last comment from all of you. Okay, from first presentation order from Abdi.
Yes, Professor Keishi and Maki, thank you very much for this question. And I think your vast experience in many places, including in Africa, of course, showcases that these are challenges that continue to exist and have been existing for over the past few years. What is important, for example, I think from our point of view, from ICRC point of view, is that we continue playing an important role for the lives of communities, even in these challenging times. No, the ICRC continues to uphold the principle of neutrality, which has enabled us and our partners from the Red Cross and Red Crescent Society to really play an important role and bring protection and assistance to communities in remote areas, in conflict-affected areas, places like Somalia, places like northern Tigray, places like Yemen, places like Sudan, and so on. So this is really, really important, and I hope that this humanitarian conference today will send a message that really the suffering of people affected by armed violence and conflict, not only in the Horn of Africa, but beyond, will be really not forgotten. And this is something that I think is going to be on the shoulder of the audience and our shoulder to continue to respond on the more urgent humanitarian needs. So we really, Professor Keishi and the audience and everybody else in the room today, we really count on your support to really help us continue providing this life-saving assistance and protection to people in the Horn of Africa in this case, but also in many other conflict environments. Over to you, Professor Keishi.
Thank you very much. Mai-san?
Yes. So as an as a staff of one of the NGOs, what we can do is very limited, but of course we will do our best to make a change by providing assistance in the future. But not only just providing simply assistance, but even through today's event, I realized that the voices from the field is very valuable sometimes, even especially for those who are living in far from the Africa. They don't have any ways to get the real information and even the access to the photos in the field. So as one of the NGO workers, the advantages is we have the information on the ground. So I will keep reporting what we are doing in the field and what's happening in the field, and to increase the attention and make a change in the future.
Thank you very much. So the last comment from, I couldn't see your name here.
But the name is Vennant, Professor Vennant.
Okay, let's go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Professor. And yes, colleagues, I think we have had here, there's a very big challenge around visibility and passing a message of the real situation, especially around some of these slow onset emergencies and the effects of conflict. I believe the Red Cross movement, Red Cross partners, we are very much closer to the communities. We access these communities more than most organizations, or rather, when we are working with our partners, we are able to provide this access to these affected. We can really play a bigger role in bringing out this picture, making it more visible. Let it not remain just a textbook story, but in terms of the realities on ground, so that the real deep effects of some of these emergencies can be seen outside there, and it can touch the people. I've just seen one of the comments in the chat book saying that I'm a student, how can I be able to support in my small way? So this is about getting information, providing the visibility, and again, making all those outside there really see the problem. Then we can have solutions both on emergency and also in terms of prevention and everything. Thank you.
Well, unfortunately, the time we have is too short for discussing about the issue we are facing today. But I think if today's session is a meaningful opportunity for every audience to think about the situation, humanitarian crisis in Horn of Africa, that will be very happy. And we really appreciate 3 participants and 1 more participant, Monica. She already left, unfortunately. But thank you very much for joining. Asante Sana and Amasakinalo in Ethiopia. I'm sorry, I forgot how to say thank you very much in Somalia in your languages. Yeah, but anyway, thank you very much for joining all 3 participants, and thank you very much for all audiences today. So the session is over, so let me hand over to the final closing ceremonies. Let's hand over to Mr. Shin Mata. He is a General Director of MSF Japan. Okay.
皆様、人道援助コングレス東京2023にご参加いただき、ありがとうございました。今年は、顧みられない危機に光をテーマに、5つの課題を取り上げました。今回は、ご参加いただいた方が回答されたアンケートでも、また、ご登壇いただいた方々からも、このテーマを取り上げてくれてありがとうという言葉を多くいただきました。また3日間を通じ、延べ800人以上の方々に参加登録をいただき、なかなか注目されることのないそれぞれのテーマに対して皆様から関心を持っていただくことの一助になったのではないかと思っております。各セッションを簡単に振り返ってみたいと思います。4月11日の早稲田大学の国際会議場からお届けしたハイブリッドセッション、世界的な注目を集める紛争と集めない紛争、その違いはいかに生まれ、どのような影響をもたらしているかでは、メディアの方々からなかなか普段聞くことのできない注目を集める紛争とそうでないものが生まれる背景をご説明いただきました。また、ユースグループの代表の大学生から若者の情報源についてご紹介いただき、我々も若者たちの情報へのアプローチについて理解を深めることができました。また、国会議員の方から紛争地での日本人による人道支援活動に対して大変力強いメッセージをいただき、外務省の方からも 人間の安全保障を外交の柱に掲げる日本として、ウクライナのみならず、注目が薄まっている人道危機に対しても、しっかりと対応を行っていくというお言葉をいただきました。昨日の顧みられない熱帯病のセッションでは、DNDi や日本企業による国際的な取り組み、またパキスタンや日本での顧みられない熱帯病の現状と研究についてご紹介いただきました。日本の現状については、人道的見地からの公平性の問題にも言及いただき、また来月行われる G7 においても、この分野での取り組みが重要であることが強調されました。ミャンマーのセッションでは、大変難しい状況下で、人道援助団体が直面している課題について取り上げるとともに、人道援助団体の中立性に関して、さまざまな角度から意見をお聞きすることができました。たくさんの質問、コメントをいただき、日本の多くの方々がミャンマーの状況を懸念し、現状への理解を深め、支援を強化できないかと考えていらっしゃることが伝わってきました。本日行われた人道開発平和はどのように共存できるかのセッションでは、トリプルネクサスについてそれぞれの立場からご意見、懸念点を伺うことができました。赤十字、そして国境なき医師団のトリプルネクサスの捉え方は、視聴者の皆様にとって新しい視点になったのではないでしょうか。本日はスーダンの首都ハルツームでの戦闘による情勢悪化によって残念ながら JICA の坂根様のご登壇が叶いませんでした。スーダンの情勢が早く落ち着くことを心より願っております。最後のアフリカの角のセッションでは、なかなか注目されることのない東アフリカ地域の現状、援助活動における課題についてお話しいただきました。気候変動による深刻な干ばつ、そして長引く紛争、これらが栄養失調やコレラ、感染症、そういったすでに崩壊しかけている医療をさらに圧迫していることがよく分かりました。また、ここでもやはりメディアなどの注目を集められていない紛争の元で暮らしている人たちの苦しみが浮き彫りになりました。人道援助コングレスは、国際協力に携わるさまざまな方々にご参加いただき、異なる立場からの意見、考えを互いに表明し、問題への理解を多角的な視点から深めることができればと考え、立ち上げたプラットフォームです。今年の援助コングレスは、まさにそのような機会になったのではないでしょうか。来年以降も引き続き開催してまいりたいと存じております。また来年もご参加いただけたら大変ありがたく思います。3日間にわたる人道援助コングレス東京2023にご参加いただき、誠にありがとうございました。